In 2022, I wrote an essay for a wonderful online publication called Bright Wall Dark Room about the themes of mending and repair in The Brave Little Toaster. And while I was revisiting and researching this movie, which I used to watch all the time as a kid, I realized that it's Toy Story, but earlier, and how had I never noticed this before? So I wanted to spend some time exploring the connections between these two extremely beloved movies and why we keep returning to this story. Both stories center around sentient objects who perceive abandonment and embark on a journey of reunion and self-discovery. Both have central figures in the Master and Andy, who are the crux of the characters' motivations despite being minor characters themselves. In both The Brave Little Toaster and Toy Story 2, the characters experience some form of physical damage and fear that they will be tossed because of it. We have some scenes that almost exactly mimic each other. The terrifying landfill to trash compactor scenes in both The Brave Little Toaster and Toy Story 3, as well as my personal favorite, the mending of both Woody by Andy in Toy Story 2 and of Toaster by the Master in Brave Little Toaster. There are matching characters in the air conditioner in The Brave Little Toaster with both Lotso and Stinky Pete, and all three are jaded and cynical about humans who have let their sadness and perceived rejection turn sour. Both Sid and the museum collector seem to stand in for the shop owner in The Brave Little Toaster. Major differences are obviously the animation style. The Brave Little Toaster is a musical and Toy Story is not, despite the franchise having two of the most memorable songs ever written. In The Brave Little Toaster, the Master does take a bit more of a central role in actually trying to rescue his items from the trash compactor, whereas in Toy Story 3 they are rescued by the aliens, and in all three of the Toy Story films end up getting back to Andy on their own accord without his help. Master also has several moments of mending various items and rejecting new ones, which is a recurrent theme for the characters themselves and a slight departure from the Toy Story franchise and the introduction of the new toy, Buzz, which is, of course, the catalyst for that first film. The Toy Story franchise takes the plot points from The Brave Little Toaster and expands them into a series with the culmination of the Brave Little Toaster arc ending with Toy Story 3, with both of our central characters heading off to college. It also feels worth noting that these stories do end differently. Andy and Woody are separated probably forever at the end of Toy Story 3, while Toaster and the rest of the appliances are reunited with Master and begin the next part of their journey with him. When I think about these movies, I think the biggest and most important difference in the film, however, is the switch from appliances to toys. Toys inherently have so much personality and character imbued in them already by both their visual element and how we interact with them, and that it's much easier for us to relate to the idea of their sentience. I don't know about you, but I definitely believed that all of my toys came to life when I was a kid, although it was a little bit more sinister because I believed that if all of them weren't touching me in my sleep, they would murder me. Maybe that's just me. The Brave Little Toaster is also significantly darker in both animation, like it is physically darker to look at in a lot of the scenes, but also in themes. Toaster's nightmare of electrocution, the nightmare clown, like all of that scene is terrifying, which is a benefit of not being produced by Disney at the time. So we have these two movies, almost a decade apart, very, very similar. A lot of people say that Toy Story ripped off The Brave Little Toaster. Is it really just copying a previously successful formula? The Brave Little Toaster is a novella written in 1980 by Thomas M. Dish. The rights were purchased by Disney 2 years later in 1982 after John Lasseter heard about it from a friend and convinced Tom Wilhite to acquire it. A year later, John Lasseter and Glenn Keane were working on a 2D, 3D short test film of Where the Wild Things Are to pitch to Disney as a test for a computer animated version of The Brave Little Toaster. This was turned down when the current president of Disney, Ron W. Miller, asked about how much it would cost. John Lasseter said it wouldn't cost any more than regular animation, and Miller said that there would be no reason to do it unless it was faster or cheaper. So they scrapped the project for the time being and subsequently fired Lasseter. A year later, in 1984, Disney bumped the project to their newly formed Hyperion Pictures, which was headed by Tom Wilhite. He successfully requested the Brave Little Toaster project from Disney, and though the initial financing did come from Disney, Disney was not involved in the production of the film whatsoever. Because of this, the creators were able to explore these darker themes not usually allowed by Disney. And in 1987, the traditionally animated version premieres, directed by Jerry Reese, and Thomas M. Dish, the original author of the novella, was involved in the adaptation of the screenplay. And Jerry Reese also was able to draw on his networks of both former Disney animators and recent Cal Arts grads. Many of these animators would go on to animate, direct, etc. films of the Disney Renaissance and or go to Pixar and end up working on Toy Story. Back to John Lasseter. He's fired from Disney, but not before finishing the Wild Things test project. So he starts working for Lucasfilm in the burgeoning CGI department. The graphics group at Lucasfilm is purchased by Steve Jobs and becomes Pixar Studios in 1986, where Lasseter becomes the chief creative officer. And in 1988, creates the short film Tin Toy, which wins Pixar its first Oscar and gets the attention of Disney, which eventually leads to Toy Story and Lasseter's feature directorial debut. And if that isn't enough connection, the music in Brave Little Toaster is composed by David Newman, who, yes, is Randy Newman's cousin. Both the Brave Little Toaster and Toy Story series focus on feelings of abandonment, grief, and fear, specifically around major life changes and events, but also friendship, love, and trust in those same moments. There's also loneliness, anger, confusion, and hope. These are very relatable emotions that can be complicated for children and young people, and adults, let's be honest, to articulate when we are in the middle of it. John Lasseter said that the idea for Toy Story 3 came to him when he was sending his own son off to college, and all he could think about was his son as a young boy sliding down the slide. We all experience these major shifts repeatedly throughout our lives, which is why this narrative is so particularly compelling and why Disney keeps returning to it again and again. We see it in Homeward Bound, in the enchanted staff in Beauty and the Beast, the circus bugs in A Bug's Life, and honestly Flick's entire redemption story arc, Doc in Cars, and honestly to greater and lesser extents through most, if not all, of Pixar's library of work. They return to these narratives because they work, obviously, and ultimately filmmaking is a business and they want a formula they know will be successful, but also because these themes are so universal. This story is clearly one Lasseter and the team had loved for a very long time and felt that it was important enough to tell again in a new way. And this story is old. It's basically Orpheus and Eurydice if Orpheus had been a bit more like Toaster, who would absolutely never have looked back. It's Odysseus finding his way back to Penelope when all seems hopeless. I mean, there is a reason we have so many iterations of this type of tale. We all know what it is to feel lonely or rejected, or to feel a simultaneous grief and rage at a loss, whatever that loss may be, to discover friendship in an unlikely place. And hopefully all of us have known what it is to love someone so much, whether a friend or family member, partner, or pet, that we would do anything to find our way back to them. I also think, and bear with me a moment, but I think that what separates these movies in particular from their, let's say, Greek counterparts is the fact that they are sentient objects, which in a way sort of forces us to face our own obsolescence in the wake of consumerism. In 1986, the year before the release of The Brave Little Toaster, a cargo ship called the Kian roamed the ocean for 16 months looking for a place to dump 14,000 tons of incinerated garbage from the US. The crew illegally dumped 4,000 tons of the waste near Haiti. They changed the name and the registration of the ship 3 times in an effort to conceal the remaining 10,000 tons dumped directly into the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Millennials came of age in a society where things are made to be replaced quickly. Electronics and clothes pile up at thrift stores and then are shipped to cities and villages in the global south where they poison the water and the soil. We have huge companies like Shein, Amazon, and Temu creating absolutely worthless products while exploiting workers to make them as cheap as possible so that we want to buy a new one each week. We are meant to think of our purchases as temporary, as something to be replaced at the slightest hint of overuse, or simply because there's something new available, which is a very new problem when most of human history required everything, every single thing, to be made from scratch, and then mending it again and again and again. Something that I love about the Brave Little Toaster in particular is that the character of the master exists at odds with this world around him. Rather than immediately replacing his objects when he realizes they're gone, as both his mother and his girlfriend repeatedly try to get him to do throughout the film, he goes to a junkyard to find other discarded and forgotten objects that maybe he can restore. And then, of course, he finds his items. He nearly dies in an attempt to collect them, saved only by Toaster throwing himself into the gears of the compactor. And Master, in the penultimate scene of the film, he hunches over his beloved and battered toaster with his tools in his hand, and his girlfriend says to him, like, why don't you just go find a new one? And he smiles and says, are you kidding? Where could I find another toaster like this? Oh my God, that makes me emotional. This story of these items longing for reuse is so compelling. Toaster being not only mended but used again by this person that he loves so much brings him and the master so much joy. And I don't think anyone can not cry at the end of Toy Story 3 because now Andy is choosing loss to give joy to someone else. Also, for musical theater nerds like myself, there is actually a musical phrase after Woody says, "So long, partner," heartbreaking, that mimics a phrase in A Heart Full of Love from Les Miserables, which is, of course, if you know, the song where Eponine brings the man that she loves, Marius, to meet his love, Cosette, even though it hurts her because she knows it will make him happy. Do I dream? I'm away. It's a slight change, but it's even in the same key and octave as Cosette sings. I don't know if that's intentional, but I hear the line, "I am lost, I am found," every time I watch that section, and I sob. I am lost, I am found. And it's because, just like these characters, we want to be mended. We want our breaks to be fixed and our rips to be sewn. There's this beautiful line that Thomas Dish wrote in the original novella for Toaster, where Toaster says, "We need people to take care of. We need people to take care of us." We want to be chosen for love again and again. And that story is never going to get old. In my life, there's been no one like him anywhere, where he is. If he asked, I'd be his. All I'm saying is that Les Mis opened on Broadway in 1987, which is the same year that Brave Little Toaster came out.